Okay, so I want you to pay close attention to what the directions say and not get confused. On block number 2, Melody, it says the finished block size is 9-inch square. The number you need to make is 4. So we're going to make 4 of these, but the finished size is 9 inches. That means after the 1/4-inch seams have been taken all the way around. So when you cut or trim these squares down after you've put all of them together, you're going to trim at 9.5, not 9. So make sure you're clear on that one. You can see that I have taken and divided everything into nice little piles of what we just cut. And then I took and laid out everything that I need to make one of those squares. Okay, so I'm going to need 4 of these. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and these are my 2-inch squares right here. So you can see I just have them laying on top of each other. I like to lay them out so that I can just start grabbing things and stitching instead of having to sew and then go sort. I like to have everything laid out. So 4 of the dark purple and its coordinate, I've got this one. These, I have 2 of them over there because we're going to start marking. And then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1 for the center. So you can see how nicely everything is laid out, and all I have to do is start stitching after I have grabbed my friction pin, and you can see I have it right there, and I'm going to start marking. Okay, so now I'm ready to show you how I do my marking. I have gotten my friction pin, and I'm using the Quilter's Magic Wand. And I love this little tool because it's easy, and when I'm filming it, I don't have a lot of space without hitting my camera like I just did. So it just is a really good way to get a straight edge. So what I'm going to do next, I'm still in the preparation phase for sewing. So it says to take all my 2-inch squares and mark them with a diagonal line. So you can see I have them all sorted, and now I'm going to spend the next few minutes just taking my magic wand, putting it from angle it from corner to corner, and I'm going to draw a straight line. Now I do allow for the width of the pen, so I scoot this ruler over just a little bit so that my marking is from point to point, because the width of the pen does take up a little bit of width. So you can see here that I allowed just a little bit, and this is hard to do on camera, but I think I'm getting it pretty good. Okay, and you can see that from corner to corner that is marked. I'm going to sit here until all of these are done and all of these are done. But that's how I do my marking. I love the friction pen because it goes away with heat, and you can put the cap on to keep it from drying out when you're not using it. So once you've marked, we're ready to begin our 4 patch, which is on page 5. Okay, so now we're ready to start putting our 4 patch together. I first wanted to speak to you about a 1/4-inch foot. Now I love this 1/4-inch foot because it lets me get an accurate seam allowance. You can see that it has a little gauge, metal gauge right here, and this is also a snap-on foot, so I can easily take this on and off. But you see that it has that little metal gauge right there, so that when I put my raw edges together, which I've done here, just like it shows in the picture, it's going to be a blue one on the left and I think this one is called Purple Shimmer on the right. The first one is called Aqua Striated. I'm going to put the raw edges together. Now I'll tell you a little bit about how I keep my pieces from coming apart, and that is because I use a 1.8 or 2.0 seam allowance. When I do that, then I don't have issue with things coming apart at the seams. Now if you want to sew off and chain, what is called chain stitch, then I can come to the next set that I'm going to sew together, and I can fold these or put these right sides together, and not have to cut with my cutter, but just merely keep sewing. So I did the first one, there's the second one. If I want to continue on, I would again get the first two that it mentioned and how I laid them out as well. Keep the raw edges together. And you can see how I'm letting this gauge right here give me my 1/4 inch seam, because this has asked for a 1/4 inch seam. So right sides together, raw edges together, and then I feed it into the machine. And I can do this until I have all 4 of my, whoops, sorry. It's real hard not to hit the camera, or the tripod that the camera is on actually. Raw edges together. And I can just keep feeding them into the machine, and then when I'm done I can cut them apart. So I'll put 2 more together, and that just leaves me one last set, and then we'll open them up and you can look at how I have put them together. I love this 1/4 inch foot. And it's not like in the old days, the newer machines, you can actually stitch off the edge of the fabric and not have to worry about it jamming your machine up. If you're working on an older machine, you might want to be careful with that. Okay, so this is my last 4 patch. Right sides together. Right sides together. And if you haven't cut perfectly, that's okay. You want to get close, but just know that we are going to sew these together and then trim them down using our Tucker trimmer. Okay, so if you have a cutter, then just push the button and cut. And I love that feature. Then I can go back and I can cut these apart, and you can see what it is that I have done. By daisy chaining or chaining these together. Okay, so the first one looks just like the picture in that it's blue on the left and it's purple shimmer on the right. So I'm going to have to go over to the ironing board and or my pressing mat. I don't have an ironing board anymore. I created the pressing mat about 10 years ago, and that's all I use is the pressing mat. So you can see that this is what our squares are going to look like once I have pressed them. And she says, like most patterns do, to press to the dark side. So my seam is going to be pressed to the dark side, which means to this piece. And on this one, it's going to be pressed to that side. And you'll see after we press them why we're doing that, because those seams are going to nest into each other. They're going to kind of do this. And when they do, you don't even need to use pins to put them together. So I'll go to the pressing mat, I'll press these, and we'll return with some more stitching. Okay, so I've done my pressing, and now it's time to stitch together. And I wanted to explain the nesting together of the seams that I talked about. When you place, because you can see here how I'm doing this correctly in that how I've got them laid out. It's a blue upper left and green lower right. So I'm going to be seaming across the top, and you'll notice that the nesting part is where these 2 edges, see if I can get in there close enough, that one, they have a little bit of height to them, and so the blue is going to be pushed toward the green. That's called nesting. You want to keep your raw edges together. And now I'm going to stitch a 1/4 of an inch seam. And as this is sewing, it's pushing the top layer into the bottom one. So I cannot overemphasize the use of a 1/4 inch foot. So we'll trim this, and if we did our homework right, oh, look at there. Doesn't get much better than that. So this is my first 4 patch. I have 3 more of these to do. When I do that, I'm going to go back to the pressing and press that seam, but we'll do this again so you can understand the nesting part. Blue upper left, green lower right. I'm going to flip them so that I have them right sides together. I'm going to put the raw edges together, and as I put them together, when I slide them, I'm kind of doing this kind of motion. When I slide them, I can feel them meet each other. Sorry, I got to get it where you can see it. And if you're off a little bit, see, like my seam is off right there, it's okay because that's going to be in the seam. I'm not going to worry about that. This is not a competition quilt. You can see that my seam allowance is going to compensate for my not so accurate cut. And if I'm pressing or letting it nest into the seam, the seam underneath, then I don't have to worry about anything. I still took a 1/4 inch seam. It's just a little bit shy right there. So, did it nest? Look at there. Ladies and gents, this is without using pins. That's why nesting is so important. So that's my second one. I'm going to do my third one. Blue upper left, green lower right. Flip them over. Do you understand why we have pressed to the dark side? Because this seam is going this way and this seam is going that way. And that's how you nest, is because when you're putting them together, this one should be pushing into the bottom one. Raw edges together. Make sure you're keeping your raw edges together here. Using the 1/4 inch foot. And stitch. Let's see if we're 3 for 3. Open it up. Wow. I could have spent a lot of time pinning that, but because I understand why to press to the dark side and how to nest, then I don't have that issue. Blue upper left, green lower right. Flip them over. Nest them. Make sure your raw edges are together. Pay attention to your 1/4 inch foot. And trim. Am I 4 for 4? Look at there. It just didn't get any better than that. So now I'm going to go back to the pressing mat, but actually I could go ahead at this point and move into the flying geese, which is on page 6 of your instructions, and picking up the pieces that I have already pre-cut and laid out. I know that this fabric is what's going to go with this. I have already done my lines, and now I'm going to stitch on the line, keeping the edges even. And for this, I'm going to take my 1/4 inch foot off and replace it with the one that I have, I think, put down in here. Let's see. Oh, so sorry. Where did I put my presser foot? Here it is. I know I know I'm not the only one that can not leave a spot and lose things, so y'all can all chuckle with me because I do that all the time. Okay, so I do have my clear foot on, and it's kind of curved at the front, but I do like the fact that it's clear so that I can see what it is that I'm stitching. Okay, so I have lined my raw edges together, and now I'm going to stitch on the line. And that's what we used our marking pen for. And as long as you keep your edges together, you can see how I'm stitching on the line. Once you stitch on the line, then this gets opened up like so. So you'll press this next. And for this, I'm just going to finger press, especially right here at this seam, and I just use my fingernail to go up and down that seam, and you can see how nice and straight this is, and that's because I sewed on the line, and I have to open this one up before I lay this one down. So keeping the edges together, and you can see why this one needed to be open, because otherwise you stitch them together and now you have a little bit of a mess that you have to go rip out. Okay, so I'm going to open this up. I'm going to finger press that. Oh, look how pretty. Look how pretty, look how pretty. So I'll go do some trimming, because I definitely, oh, and I forgot to do that before I stitched that, but I'm not going to go take that out. I'll kind of trim around this one. You should trim first, but you're going to trim this down to 1/4 inch seam, and then the same on this one. Trim to 1/4 inch seam. And that eliminates quite a bit of bulk. And then I'm going to show you toward the end of the video how we're going to trim this up with the Tucker trimmer. But first of all, I need to press these. So I have 4 of these to make, and then I have these to make with this new fabric that we've introduced this month. So your diagonal is always going to point from the center to the lower left for putting your flying geese together. So we'll stitch. After you've stitched, make sure you trim, leaving 1/4 inch. You're going to finger press that open, then lay this one, always working from the center toward the bottom corner. Raw edges together. Sew on the line. Trim. trim the thread with the machine, and then trim to 1/4 inch. I'm also using Kai scissors, which cut all the way to the point. You can see that brand there. Made Japan. N5210 is the brand that I love. It's a very easy scissor to have hanging around, and they are very, very good quality scissors. Okay, so we're going to finger press this open. So I'm going to make 4 of these, 4 of these, and I already have the 4 patches done, and we're ready to go do some more pressing. So I'll be back. So I didn't want you to think that I had forgotten our our blue and our green 4 patch that goes in the center. So we'll backtrack just for a second and do that center square. So green goes to the left, blue goes to the right. We're going to keep our edges together. And I wanted to do this while we're waiting for the iron to heat up. Okay, then the last row of that center 4 patch, it's going to be blue on one side and green on the other. So I like to keep them together in order of how it is in the book. Trim. And you can see that once I go over and do some pressing, that I'm ready to sew the seam together like we're going to do on the other 4 patches. So green, blue, blue, green. I'll press these, I'll fold them together because it's going to the dark side. We will nest just like we did before, but I can tell you that it really is important. I'll see if I can do this one without pressing it. Sometimes you can finger press. If you don't feel comfortable with that, then definitely use your iron. Raw edges together. Trim. Let's see how we did with just some finger pressing. Oh, not bad at all. So now we have our 4 patch for the center. So now we'll go do some final pressing and we'll be ready to start sewing the rows together. So the next thing we're going to do is sew our 3.5 inch flying geese together. According to the diagram, this is the way they go. So I'm going to put the dark purple on top. I'm going to line up the raw edges. You can see here how I'm lining those up. I've put my 1/4 inch foot back on the machine. Raw edges together. Now I can tell by where this crosses over right here. This is the point right here. This is the point of my flying geese. So and I don't encourage anybody to get their finger that close to the needle, but I encourage everybody to make sure that that's where they're crossing. Because that way I know I have not cut my point off. So when I open this up, you can see I didn't cut my point off, but I didn't sew close enough. Can you see that? See how here's where I should have been sewing and I stitched here. And that's because the camera is in my way. So because the seam is going to be sewn flat, I'm going to go back and restitch that, this time making sure that this is in the right place and it is crossing in the right place. so that you can see the difference there. Just that much, just that little bit means all the difference in the world. So when I open this up, you can see now that my flying geese are flying the way they're supposed to. So there's one square, and after I get all 4 of these sewn together, then we're going to go trim everything down, every block. This one, or each one of the flying geese, this one, and the one that goes in the center. So we'll trim all those down to 3.5. So a little bit more sewing, and then we'll be ready to do our rows, and you'll have your first block all together. Okay, so now I want to talk about the tucker trimmer just briefly. It has excellent instructions with it, and there's also a YouTube video on it, and I think it's in the instructions where to go. Yes, it says so right here, that you can go to www.youtube.com, user Deb Tucker Studio 180, and this will talk about the tucker trimmer, but I'll give you the cliff notes. And that is, if you're working with 1/2 inch, that the half circle goes in the upper right diagonally to lower left. If you're working in inches, then it goes from full circle upper right, if you're right-handed, down to the left. But because we're aiming for a 3.5 inch square, excuse me, I wanted to explain how I'm doing this. So half circle, upper right corner, and I'm looking to make sure that this is passing through to the corners and that I have a cross section right here. So I know that I'm lined up correctly. And what I'm going to do, you can see how I'm off just a little bit here, but I'm off quite a bit on the other side, so we're going to trim that off, and we're going to trim that off, and then we're going to move our cut edges to the inside of the ruler, place the half circle upper right, and this time I am lining my 3.5 inch line that I've just cut up with this ruler, and then I'm going to cut off this and make my cut across the top. And now you can see that I have a very nicely put together 3.5 inch perfect cut square. I'm going to do the same with this one, and next week we're going to talk more so about another ruler. This is, you can see here how I've cut it real close here. It's going to be fine though, so I'm going to trim this up, Once you have all of these squares trimmed, you're then going to finish your square. You're going to put them in the order as shown, and pay attention to these little arrows. That means that your seams are going to be pressed to the outside. So you'll do this row first, then you're going to put this row together, then you're going to put this row together, and then you're going to seam them. So you'll have 3 pieces that look like this, or not look like this, but you see it'll be this row, and then it'll be this row, and then it'll be this row. Once you have the rows together, then you're going to seam them here and here, and then using the larger Deb Tucker trimmer, you're going to trim just like we did with the 5 inch square, or the 6.5 inch square. So let's take what I've gotten so far. I still have these to trim, but you can see the layout. The blues go in the bottom corner. Let's see if we can get a little further away. So it'll be blues in the bottom corners. So the corners will be blue. So blue corner, blue corner. This is going to be in the middle. Oh, I don't know if I can get far enough away. So blue corner, blue corner. These are then going to go like so once they're trimmed up. So this will be a row. This will be a row like this and like this. And then we'll have a row here, blue corners, and pointing in that direction. So we're going to sew these three together first. Sorry, I need to scoot everything this way just a little bit. There we go. Okay, so we're going to do this row first. Then we're going to sew this and this, so we get this row. And then we're going to sew this row together. Once these seams are put in, and these, then you're going to make these seams and these seams, and now you're going to have a finished, not finished, but a cut edge 9.5 inch square. So I hope this has helped you put your squares together. You can see it's going to be beautiful. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you have any questions, you can always call me at the store. Otherwise, happy stitching.